Have you ever noticed that you're just, well, different after midnight? All of a sudden, your worries seem way bigger, the snacks in the kitchen are calling your name, and sometimes, out of absolutely nowhere, your best ideas strike. Well, it turns out you're not imagining it. And today, we're going to dive into the science of why your brain basically becomes a completely different person late at night. I mean, it's a universal feeling, right? You're lying in bed, and bam, you're suddenly solving a work problem that had you stumped all day long. Or, you're spiraling about an awkward email you sent back in 2017. Why does our mind become this intense, strange police in the dead of night? Well, believe it or not, science actually has a name for this. It's called the mind after midnight hypothesis. And here's the key. This isn't just about being a little sleepy. Nope, it's a predictable biological state where your brain starts operating under a totally different set of rules. You literally become more emotional, more impulsive, and yeah, surprisingly, a whole lot more creative. Okay, here's the best way to picture it. All day long, you've got the prefrontal cortex, the logical, rational CEO of your brain running the show, making all the smart decisions. But after midnight, that CEO clocks out and goes home. And that leaves the more emotional, impulsive, and creative parts of your brain, let's call them the interns, in charge of the whole office with absolutely zero adult supervision. So how in the world does this late-night takeover even happen? Well, the answer lies in this constant battle for control inside your mind, a battle fought by what you can think of as your brain's two competing clocks. So on one side, you've got your master clock, which is your body's strict 24-hour schedule. It wants you awake when it's light out and asleep when it's dark. Simple. But on the other side, you've got sleep pressure. Think of that like a pressure cooker that starts building steam the moment you wake up. The longer you're awake, the more pressure builds. So when you stay up late, that pressure cooker is just screaming, "Go to bed," while your master clock is trying to stick to the schedule. And that's when the war really begins. This brings us to something called the circadian nadir, which is just a fancy term for that window between about midnight and 4 a.m. when your body's master clock hits its absolute rock bottom point of alertness. This is the moment it officially sends the CEO of your brain home for the night. And here's the wild part. It powers down your rational thinking whether you're asleep or not. Your brain is biologically programmed to check out, even if you're trying to force it to stay online. So this conflict between your body's schedule and its desperate need for sleep creates a very strange and potent chemical cocktail in your brain. So let's take a look at the recipe that makes you feel so weird after midnight. Just look at this chemical soup. You've got peak melatonin and maxed out adenosine, which are both screaming, "Go to sleep." That's why you have reduced alertness and feel so tired. But at the exact same time, your circadian rhythm hits a peak for dopamine, the reward chemical, which makes you way more impulsive. And then, the cherry on top, a surge of the stress hormone cortisol kicks in around 3 a.m., which is the perfect trigger for late-night anxiety. It's an absolute recipe for chaos. Now, this chemical state has a fascinating side effect. Your brain develops what's called an attentional bias. It actively starts scanning your environment and your memories for threats and focuses on negative stuff. This is probably an evolutionary hangover, Back in the day, being awake at night meant you were super vulnerable to predators, so your brain went on high alert. The only difference is that today, that predator is just an awkward memory from middle school. And this brings us to the core paradox of the whole thing. This altered state is a true double-edged sword, one that's capable of producing both our most brilliant insights and, well, our most dangerous impulses. I mean, this quote just nails it, doesn't it? When you're awake but your rational mind isn't, you enter this uniquely vulnerable and, frankly, precarious state of consciousness. And the dangers are very, very real. Research shows that the risk of suicidal thoughts is over 3.5 times higher in the early morning hours. And when does that happen? Right during that circadian nadir we talked about, when our rational defenses are at their absolute lowest. And this vulnerability, it goes way beyond just our thoughts. As you can see, this is the time when all sorts of risky behaviors spike, from binge eating to substance use. It's the perfect storm. Our impulse control is at its weakest, while our brain's reward-seeking circuits are totally on overdrive. But okay, let's pivot for a second, because it is not all doom and gloom. Not at all. The very same process that creates all this risk is also what fuels our creativity. See, during the day, your brain uses logical, convergent thinking to find the single best answer. But at night, with the CEO gone, your brain switches to divergent thinking and starts making these broad, creative, out-of-the-box connections between totally unrelated ideas. So how does that midnight epiphany actually happen? Well, first, your rational brain stops shooting down all your so-called silly or illogical ideas. Second, your mind just starts connecting distant concepts it would normally ignore. And third, there's something called the genius gap. This happens in that magical moment right as you're drifting off to sleep, a stage called N1. In this state, your mind is so free to make connections that your chances of solving a really complex problem can actually triple. Now, it's really important to know that this late night experience isn't exactly the same for everyone. A huge part of it comes down to your biology, and more specifically, your chronotype. Are you a morning lark or a night owl? Well, you might be surprised to learn that in a massive study, night owls consistently scored higher on cognitive tests for things like memory, reasoning, processing speed. Their internal clocks are just biologically wired to peak later in the day. The problem for night owls is something called social jet lag. They are biologically wired for late nights, but our 9 to 5 world forces them to live completely out of sync with their internal clock. This chronic mismatch can lead to serious stress and health issues. Forcing a night owl to wake up at 7 a.m. is basically like waking a morning lark up at 3 a.m. It's just brutal. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? How can we navigate this different version of ourselves that shows up after midnight? Let's put together a little framework for understanding your own nocturnal mind. Okay, let's talk about that dreaded 3 a.m. anxiety spiral. We've all been there. It starts with that natural cortisol spike that just jolts you awake. Then, your brain's default mode network, which is the part that handles self-reflection, gets stuck on a loop, ruminating on all your worries. And without any daytime distractions to pull you out of it, those small problems start to feel absolutely catastrophic. So, here's the most important thing to remember. Your late-night brain isn't broken, it's not malfunctioning, and it's not wrong. It's just operating under a different biological and chemical rulebook. Understanding that is the first step, and that means you can either put a notepad by your bed for those brilliant ideas, or you can learn to dismiss those anxious thoughts as just a product of your brain chemistry. And that leaves us with one final kind of provocative question. If your brain's chemistry is so fundamentally different from day to night, which one is the real you? Is it the logical, focused person at 2 in the afternoon, or is it the emotional, creative, and vulnerable person at 2 in the morning? It's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.